So this is the Fried Liver and Traxler. Essentially, it's an app to help users practice this Italian opening and some defenses for it. So this is the home page. It has a little title, little subtitle, and then we have two different learning sections and one quiz section. So, typically the user would look at this, they'd see this header, kind of get a feel for what this site will be about, and then probably start with the leftmost learning section right here. So that's what we'll start with. So to begin, it shows kind of the opening sequence, kind of these initial moves. So the pawn comes out to e4. We see the horse then comes out to f3, and that's pretty typical. And then this bishop comes out, and this is kind of where the move really starts to differentiate itself from other openings. So this is kind of where it starts. It outlines all of this in the step one, where it says, okay, well, both players move their king pawn, and we see that right there. The knights get developed. Okay, the white goes to bc4. That checks out. We see that right here. And then, so the user at this point would feel like, they kind of have a basic understanding of this kind of initial sequence, and maybe they would move on here. Okay, so I'm looking at this. Looks like the horse moved from right here to right here. That's easy enough to follow. That kind of makes sense. Looks like maybe, we're going to be targeting this spot right here, maybe right here, but, not really, because then the rook might take. So we'll move on. We see that black pushes us with this black pawn. So kind of, just thinking about what the next possible moves might be, it kind of makes sense that we would take it with this pawn, and that is what we end up doing there. We kind of establish a presence in the center and continue our attack. Black responds with this counter right here, takes that pawn back. And then, intuitively we might think, okay, well, let's just take it with the bishop. But that's actually not what happens, and we can say, okay, well, the horse moves there. And maybe that move is a little bit confusing for the user, so they might backtrack a couple times. Okay, that gets taken, horse takes, and then we move right here. Okay, that kind of makes sense. Okay, king takes, that seems reasonable. Maybe now we'll take with the bishop and put them in check. Except we don't end up doing that. We actually bring out our queen and put them in check that way. And this actually gives us a much stronger position. And this is kind of where the fried liver opening ends. And white just has a really solid position. If the king moves, let's say to g8, all it takes is for our bishop to move right here, put him in check, and then queen would probably take that. We retake with our queen, and we've pretty much got them. So really, really solid position for white. If there's any more confusion, we can kind of backtrack. But yeah, this all makes sense to me. So, maybe we'll continue home. And now we'll look at the defense. So again, we see kind of this opening. It's pretty much the same thing. Okay, cool. And this is where black really starts to differentiate itself. So let's kind of see what happens. Okay, so it looks like we bring out our black bishop. This is a little bit different, where kind of in the initial fried liver opening, we saw black move this pawn out. Instead, it looks like this is being brought out. Okay, that's different, but it kind of makes sense. It gives us a pretty good center position. I can conceptualize why that might be a good move. Let's see how white responds. Okay, so white is continuing with the fried liver attack. We see that our queen is kind of in danger, and our rook is also in danger. And this is really not what we want. We could take with our king, but as we kind of saw, that puts us in a bad position. Actually, we can't right now, right? Because we have this white bishop right here that will be targeting us. So we're actually not even allowed to do that. So I'm kind of curious, where we would go from here. And we make this move, and that, that initially seems a little bit weird. There's not anything protecting this bishop, so it seems like the king is just going to take it. Let's see if that's what's happened, and that is in fact what ends up happening. So this feels like kind of a bad spot to be in. Kind of interested to see where it goes from here. Okay, we bring out our horse further, putting our king in check. Okay. King goes right there. Okay, putting some pressure on our horse. Maybe not quite what we want, but I do see my queen right here. and I can bring that out there, and that seems like a pretty reasonable move. And yeah, that is kind of what ends up happening. And black, has a pretty good position right here because we've got their king, all the way on the third row, and that's really not a great position for them to be in. Obviously, we might kind of lose our rook in this process, but arguably it's pretty worth it. We've got their king in a pretty good spot. So yeah, that seems like a reasonable defense to the fried liver attack. Yeah, again, if maybe I had some confusion, I want to watch this part again, right? Because that's a little bit weird. We're just sacrificing this bishop. Seems like a pretty terrible move. But that is kind of what we do. Bring out the horse, okay, the queen, okay. Yeah, I think that I kind of get what's going on here. So at this point, I'm feeling pretty good about both the fried liver attack and the Traxler defense. If maybe I wanted to just quickly review and flip through these guys again, maybe I would. Okay, kind of looking at how this goes. Yep, that's pretty much how I remember it. Maybe I would skim through the Traxler one more time before I take the quiz, kind of looking at how this progresses. Okay, yep, gonna sacrifice the bishop, bring out the horse, the queen comes to protect it. Yeah, no, I think that I track with all of this, so I'm gonna move on to the quiz. And I've got a couple options here. Obviously, I've also got this nav bar that I can click on, but to the user, probably this is what's gonna pop out the most. It's cool. I see that it's my move, so I'm going to make a move. I remember from the previous lesson that this is how the move starts. Very cool. Black comes out to defend. I think that I bring out my horse. Yep, and that checks out. Okay. And I'm trying to remember if I bring out my horse here or if I bring out the bishop. Maybe it was the horse. No, that's not quite right. No, I actually think it was my bishop that gets brought out. Yeah, and that ends up being the correct move. Very cool. I think that we want to get this guy in position because eventually we're going to want to get him here. So if I remember correctly, it's going to be right there. Obviously, that's a pretty simple take. And then my instinct is to take it with the bishop, but actually I remember that this is the move that we want to make. The king takes. I've got a couple options. I could take with my bishop, but I actually remember that a better move is to move my queen. Yeah. And so that's everything for the fried liver quiz. I get this new button that pops up to continue to the Traxler quiz. So I can tell that this is actually going to be a two-part quiz. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We see that white makes a move, so it's clear to me. Okay, so I'm obviously playing as black here. Let's try to remember. That is a pretty typical opening. I remember that the horse comes out. Then I remember, the bishop comes out, right? Because we're going to target. Oh, maybe not quite. Maybe I was a step ahead of myself. I actually think this horse is going to come out first, and that ends up being the right move. And then I think my bishop ends up coming out, and it does. Okay. And now, they're really putting some pressure on us. I see my queen is under attack, my rook is under attack. I can't take with my king. It's not going to let me do that. I remember that bishop is right there, so that's not quite going to work. Oh yeah, I actually remember now that I'm going to sacrifice my bishop, and that's going to go just like that. Starting to kind of bring that king out. My queen is still kind of under attack, my rook is still under attack, but if I can get them in check, I can force them to move their king as opposed to being able to take one of these items, so that's actually what I will do. Cool, the king moves there, and then I remember from the lesson that I bring my queen out, both to prevent the horse from getting it, but also to protect my own, and give myself a pretty good position. So yeah, that's the end of the Traxler defense. Let's get my quiz score. I see that I missed 2 questions, and I do remember missing those 2. So maybe, I want to, again, test myself and just get 100%. So I'll actually go through this very quickly and correct all of my mistakes. So I'm going to do that. Now that I've kind of done it once, I pretty much remember how everything went. So that's everything for the fried liver. Now I'll fly through the Traxler again. I remember that these horses come out just like that. I bring out my bishop. I sacrifice him, bring out my horse, protect my horse with the queen, and now I've got 100%. So yeah, as a user, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of kind of these opening and this defense. I can navigate home. I see that this is now reflective of my new score. If I wanted to, I could, again, review the attack and the defense, but, I'm feeling pretty good at this point. So yeah, this has been Master the Fried Liver and Traxler, kind of a web app to teach you the Italian chess opening and its defense.